Now this is gonna be a bit of a strange video. As some of you may know, I'm a pretty big fan of the Persona series. In fact, longtime viewers might be a bit confused, since I've already covered Persona 5 before on this channel, twice. I've said basically all that needs to be said at this point, so why am I even talking about this? Well, the answer is quite simple. The kind folks over at Sega and Atlus were generous enough to send me an early copy of the Persona 5 PC port that, at the time of this recording, has recently released. I initially only wanted to talk about this port's quality and whether or not you should consider picking it up. However, I figured I could use this opportunity to have a more nuanced discussion about how I believe Atlus has been mishandling their re-releases of the Megaten series. This video is going to be divided into two distinct parts. I want to cover the Persona 5 ports before diving into the main meat of this topic. A lot of people have been looking forward to either getting back into this game or trying it out for the first time, so I figure we should do them a solid and quickly look at these ports to see if they're at all worth getting. Just a heads up, I'm going to be making the assumption here that you've either already played Persona 5 or know the general gist of it. While there aren't going to be any specific plot spoilers in this video per se, the footage you'll be seeing is from the mid-game since it best represents what to expect out of it gameplay-wise. Just keep that in mind in case you're a new player looking to get into this game for the first time. I would also like to reiterate that I played the PC release for this video, and everything said is about that version of the game. I won't be covering the PlayStation and Xbox versions, but I will briefly talk about the Switch release, since a lot of people are excited about that one specifically. Actually, fuck it, let's just cover that one first. Persona 5 Royal on the Nintendo Switch is Persona 5 Royal on the Nintendo Switch. Full disclosure, I didn't play this one myself. The only experience I have is the footage you're seeing on screen now, which is provided by a few friends of mine. Going off of what they sent me, it's exactly what you would expect it to be. The game runs at 720p and at a locked 30 frames per second. Graphical effects, texture quality, and anti-aliasing are noticeably turned down, which is especially obvious when looking at some side-by-side comparisons. This is all stuff you're used to if you're an avid Switch user. It's a necessary sacrifice to accommodate the hardware, but the trade-off is that you're able to take the game anywhere you want. I imagine the graphical downgrades won't be nearly as noticeable when playing the game portably. Hell, it might even look nicer in a few areas if you're playing off of an OLED model. If you were at all worried that Persona 5 on Switch was going to be a heavily compromised version of the game or that it would run poorly, then you can rest easy. Sure, it doesn't look as nice, but it's still the same game at its core. I find it really strange that it took Atlus as long as they did to bring this game over to the Switch. I was never one of those people who were campaigning online demanding Atlus to bring Persona 5 to the Switch, because we all knew that this was going to happen eventually. Persona 5 is by far the most successful game the company has ever produced, and since the Switch is also mega popular in Japan, it would be a wasted opportunity to pass up on the potential revenue. I personally think the wait was done in an attempt to get people to double dip, but regardless of the reason, I'm at the very least glad Switch owners are finally able to get a piece of the action. However, I wasn't too excited about the Switch port. What I was really looking forward to was seeing Persona 5 finally get a next-gen update. More specifically, seeing the game make its way to Steam. If you were to ask me, Persona 5 Royal on PC is the definitive way to experience the game. Even if you don't have the best PC around, being able to play Persona 5 at a stable 60 FPS was enough of a reason for me to go through it again. And if you do have the proper specs, feel free to crank up the resolution and frame rate even further. Though something that I find to be a bit disappointing is that the game doesn't natively support ultra-wide monitors, which feels like a bit of an oversight. That and the fact that Sega still insists on cramming de novo into their games, and Persona 5 is no exception. When you boil it down, it's a very basic port. There aren't many settings for you to tweak. In fact, you can't even adjust the texture or lighting quality. These are the exact same options that came with the Persona 4 port, and while that's perfectly fine, I wish that we were given more options. Especially for people who plan on playing the game on a Steam Deck, where those extra settings could go a long way in improving the experience. I know that this might come off as a huge nitpick, but to be honest, I kind of expected more, especially from a port that's being sold at full price. Now this is going to be the most contentious topic surrounding this release. Across every platform, this new version of Persona 5 is going to be sold at full price, which might be a tough pill to swallow for some players. It's mainly the PlayStation users that are getting shafted here. A lot of PS4 games offer next-gen updates for a small fee. While this isn't an ideal solution, it at the very least allows you to get the update without having to repurchase the game. Hell, some games even offer this for free, which is cool to see. Persona 5 Royal, on the other hand, doesn't do this. It instead forces players to buy the game again at full price if they want the visual upgrade, which is total bullshit. Oh cool, pay double the price for double the frame rate, I guess. Sure, the updated version comes with all of the DLC, but what if you already own it? Or better yet, just don't care. The Persona 5 DLC wasn't anything to write home about. In fact, most of it was actually detrimental, since it can completely demolish an already easy game. The novel pieces of DLC were the bonus challenge battles and the extra costumes. However, you don't even get all of it, since the Raido costumes were removed in this version of the game. I understand why this would be the case for China and Korea, but why is it like this for even the Japanese version? If you already own Persona 5 Royal on PS4, then I don't really think it's worth it to buy the game again just to get a higher frame rate. The price is a bit easier to digest if you're picking up the PC or Switch versions, though for $60, I expected there to be a little bit more. And that's probably the best way I can surmise my feelings towards the Persona 5 ports. They're great versions of the game, and if you haven't played Persona 5 yet and are looking to get into the series, then there's no better time than now. But if you've already played the game, then you might want to wait for a price drop. Getting the DLC for free is nice, but it doesn't fully justify the price it's being sold at. It's at the very least the best port we've gotten from the company so far. I guess we should move on to that topic now, huh? Atlus porting and re-releasing their games is nothing new. They've been doing it since the 90s, as most of their games released around that time would eventually end up swapping spit with every platform around. However, these new releases weren't just straight up ports, and would feature some substantial differences. Stuff like changing the music, altering the graphics, and even adding some additional content. On paper, this seems like a win-win scenario. Put the game out on multiple platforms to get more people on board, while also tossing in some brand new content to get old fans to double dip. However, the reality of this was a lot less glamorous. To say that the ports and re-releases of megaten games are a mixed bag is a bit of an understatement. While this practice started off relatively harmless, it was in the mid-2000s when things started to get a bit messier. The PlayStation 3 versions of the PS2 megaten games had a lot of emulation issues. Digital Devil Saga, for example, ran far slower than it did on its original hardware, making the gameplay experience far worse. Some games ended up better than others, but a lot of these issues still persist to this day. However, once we reached the late 2000s and early 2010s, standard ports were sort of phased out entirely. Instead, whenever one of Atlus's older games were ported to other platforms, they were marketed as these enhanced re-releases that featured plenty of brand new content, though oftentimes this came at the expense of the game's original vision. A lot of the time, this boiled down to new story content that was awkwardly shoved into the game, creating an immediate disparity. You play something like Catherine Fullbody and you can immediately tell whenever something was new because it feels tonally different or is completely irrelevant to the main plot. This leads to some occasional pacing issues that didn't exist before, and makes the overall experience worse. A lot of modern Atlus re-releases suffer from this problem. It's as if they feel pressure to justify the existence of these re-releases out of a fear of receiving backlash. While I will admit that there are a lot of good quality of life updates that come with the newer versions of these games, I feel as though we'd be better off receiving straight ports instead. All we need to do is take a look at fan reactions to prove my point. Persona 3 Portable was recently announced to be coming to Xbox, Switch, and Steam alongside the two other modern games. This sparked an argument as to whether or not the PlayStation 2 version should have been the one chosen instead. Regardless of where you stand on it, I think we can agree that this could have been avoided entirely if Portable wasn't so fundamentally different to FES. The changes made to Portable, while nice, ultimately undermines what makes Persona 3 stand out from the other modern games. Portable had to cut a lot of corners for the game to run on the weaker hardware, and the new content brought to the table received a pretty mixed reaction from players. Seeing Atlus tout this as the definitive version is probably disappointing to a lot of fans, since their preferred version of the game is being left to rot on hardware that isn't easily accessible anymore. And herein lies the problem. Whenever an older Atlus game is brought to a new platform, it's always under the guise of it being an enhanced version, which would be fine if the additional content and changes were good, but a lot of the times, it greatly alters the experience in ways that can't be ignored. By asking Atlus to port one of their older games, you're essentially spinning the roulette wheel of potential problems. We don't just get SMT Nocturne on Steam, we get a remastered version of Nocturne that has inferior lighting, poor performance, and has plenty of unnecessary DLC. We don't just get Persona 4 Arena on modern platforms, we get Persona 4 Arena with bad netcode, making the game pretty much dead on arrival. We don't just get an official translation of SMT1, we get SMT1, but it's only available on the iPhone. Oh, and would you look at that, you can't even play it anymore. The only official English release, gone. I'd say the worst example of an Atlus re-release would be with 2018's Strange Journey Redux. The original Strange Journey is one of the best titles Atlus has ever put out. Everything in the game, both narratively and gameplay-wise, was very deliberate to enforce the game's themes. You were meant to feel out of your element. You and your team explored the Schwarzwald in an attempt to save a civilization that was already on the verge of tearing itself apart. It's one of the most unique games in the franchise, and a re-release wouldn't need to do much other than clean up the visuals a bit. If you've been paying attention, you can probably see where this is going. The changes and additions brought with Strange Journey Redux fundamentally alter the core of the experience. The additional gameplay mechanics and retooling of already existing ideas do nothing but detract from the original design. Worst of all, the brand new story content completely changes the game's core message by removing all consequences. I'm not going to go into spoilers, but I hate the implications that the new content has. What sucks the most about this situation is that if Atlus were to decide to bring Strange Journey over to other platforms, you just know that they'll pick Redux over the original, or better yet, they'll make a super Strange Journey Redux with even more bullshit tacked on. Look, I get it. Sometimes when artists look back on their old work, they see all of the flaws that a regular viewer wouldn't. This fills them with the desire to remaster it, give it a second shot, and prove that they can do better now. I can relate to that to an extent. There are times when I look back on older videos I made and think about what I'd change, whether that be because I no longer agree with something I said, worded my argument poorly, or even completely remake a video because I just don't like it anymore. Of course, this isn't a one-to-one comparison, but I do understand the yearning to improve something so it can be the best it can be. I don't even think all of these re-releases are bad. All of them at least bring a few good new ideas to the table that improve the game. Well, almost. Hell, there are even a couple of times where I think the re-release version is the superior way to play the game. Persona 5 Royal is one of the best enhanced versions the company has ever done, polishing up some of the lesser aspects of the original game and offering new ideas that improve the experience. Sure, there's some additions that are a bit iffy, mainly on the gameplay side of things, but Royal is better than the sum of its parts. If every re-release in this franchise was executed to the same level of quality as Royal was, then this video wouldn't need to exist. But unfortunately, we don't live in that reality. I'm a massive fan of this franchise, and I find it to be a bit disappointing that Atlus has been trying to invalidate some of their older titles by pushing these supposed good versions. They act as though the original releases don't exist, and that this is the one true way to experience all of their games, when in actuality, the older versions are sometimes better. Does that mean I think Atlus should stop doing enhanced re-releases of their games? No. I'd personally rather see the resources go towards funding new projects, but re-releases are basically expected at this point. They almost always do well financially, so why stop them? At the very least, the community has done a great job at preserving the older versions of these games. Some members have even gone the extra mile and translated games that we never got over here, which is super cool to see. If I really want to play a specific version of a game, then I at least have some options. If Atlus wants to continue their re-release trend, then I think they should use Persona 5 Royal as a blueprint, tighten up the game's weaker aspects, and keep the new story content in line with the vision of the original game. I'm all for putting new spins on old ideas, but only if it doesn't create a worse final product. While the future of Atlus re-releases is a bit uncertain, I'm hopeful that they'll be able to get on the right path. Whatever they put out next, I'll be sure to check it out. As long as they keep the artistic vision intact, then there won't be any complaints from me.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I'd like to give a special shout out to all of my channel supporters whose names are on screen now. It's because of these lovely people that I'm able to make videos at the pace I do currently. These videos take a while to make, so if you're at all interested in helping out and donating, you can do so through my Patreon or channel memberships. I have a few things I can offer in return, such as early video access, a special Discord role, and even some behind the scenes content on occasion. Every donation helps, and if the rewards I mentioned sound at all interesting to you, then you can find out more by following the links in the description. Well, that didn't take very long now, did it? I know that this video was a bit different than the ones I typically make, but I figured that there's no harm in experimenting with more niche topics every once in a while. If you all like this style of video, then I'm open to trying it out again in the future. I'm mostly just testing the waters right now, so if you have any topics you'd like to see me discuss, whether that be related to Atlus or something completely different, feel free to suggest it in the comments section. In terms of future projects, the next video is going to be a ranking of every single Persona game from worst to best. Since I've covered every game in the series in detail, I think a ranking video would be a good way to tie the retrospective together in a nice bow. I've also been kicking around the idea of covering Sonic Frontiers on the channel when it comes out. It really depends on how much I have to say about that game once I play it myself. If I can offer a unique perspective on the topic, then I'll probably make a short video on that game. Also, I'd like to remind everyone that I have a podcast with my friend and fellow YouTuber, That Boy Aqua. We mostly just shoot the shit and cover a bunch of topics ranging from video games, movies, and even interviewing some of our YouTuber friends. It's been pretty fun despite our upload schedule. And if you're looking for some more laid-back content, then I suggest you give it a listen. You can find a link to that in the description and pinned comment. If you want to stay up to date with that and other upcoming videos, then I encourage you to follow my Twitter and join my Discord server. Both will be linked in the description. Once again, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.